What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Morning Cup of Hockey presented by Bet365. Open an account with Bet365 today and bet on a huge range of markets, whatever the sport, whatever the moment. It's never ordinary at Bet365. So use our code Daily365. That's Colby Cohen. I'm Jonny Lazarus. Today, we're going to get into our Central Division previews. We're going to be joined by Michael Russo at around 10 o'clock from The Athletic and Barstool Chief, the big Chicago Blackhawks fan, at around 9:20. We're going to go through our predictions 1 through 8 on who we think will win the division, who we think will come in last. Colby, let me just ask you this question off the bat, because a lot of people in the game of hockey talk about the Atlantic Division being the best division in the NHL. I would argue that the Central Division is just as good, if not better, than the Atlantic. There's no necessarily super weak teams. I mean, the Blackhawks were the 8th place team last year, and you could probably make the case that they will be again this year. But you look 1 through 8, and there's something to be excited about for the most part with all 8 of these teams.
Really? You get excited by the St. Louis Blues, and you get excited by J-Rock said, you said Pacific yesterday, but my team is in Central, so I will not complain. Yeah, we did.
We shuffled things around.
We did make a little bit of a shuffle because I think, Johnny got Dennis Bernstein is coming on our show tomorrow from who covers the LA Kings. So sorry, I just had to take something out of my dog's mouth, something of my daughter's, who she would not be happy if he were to chew that up. But as I was saying, I'm not ready to agree or disagree with you.
I take it back right away, because the Blues don't excite me at all.
It's like, that's what I'm saying. Like, I'm not ready to actually disagree with you completely, because I want to go through all 4. As I'm going through these these divisions, I'm sort of, refreshing my memory as I sat there last night and I went through what these teams did in the off season. And, I started to compile all my notes, because it's, who remembers everything going back to July 1. I'm like looking at a team like St. Louis, and I'm like, okay, like, they were in the news this summer because they, went out and made a couple of offer sheets. But when you look at their roster, it's like, geez. And then you even look at Minnesota's roster, and you're like, how is Bill Guerin supposed to operate with $15 million in dead cap space? It really doesn't. It really doesn't do it for me. And like, I know people are excited about Utah because they moved and they're in they're going to be owned by like a real owner and everything now. But like, I don't know, like, there's definitely a couple exciting players on Utah's roster, but I just don't see them necessarily going above, their point total last year. So let's get into it. We are going to try to start with, how they finished last year, with the exception to the fact that, Barstool Chief's going to get on with us at 9:20. So we'll obviously bump over to the Blackhawks, and then we're going to save Minnesota for last to talk to Russo, who covers that team really well. I mean, he's, how I generally feel about writers.
Yeah.
I really,
the best.
I do really like Russo. I have a lot of respect for him. I think he has a really, good head on his shoulders, the way he looks at the game. To me, I believe, looking at his work, he actually watches games and he studies the game. He's not a writer that sits in the press box and has his article written before the game is over. So I'm usually allergic to you asking me to bring on writers, but you got a one-word answer from me when you asked me about Russo. I said, yes, bring him up. I want to hear from him. So I think we agree on the fact, Johnny, that Dallas is the reigning division champion. I think we both think that they're going to hold court or hold serve is probably the better way to put it in that division.
Finished 1 point shy of the President's Trophy last year to the New York Rangers, but 1 point behind Colorado the year before in the division. They've been at the top of this division for years now, and really knocking on the door of the Stanley Cup for years now. I mean, they were, excuse me, for the most part, the consensus favorite pick in the playoffs last year to win the Cup, and they obviously had a very tough road. They had to go through Vegas, they had to go through Colorado, and then they came up short against Edmonton in the conference final. But this is a team that, of course, they lost Joe Pavelski, and there were some other departures, but they're still, to me, just as good going into this year as they were last year, if not better, because their back end, they lose Ryan Suter, who was, a little bit of a step.
Liability. He was a liability.
They get Ilya Lyubushkin. Sorry, I'm gonna have to take a sip of water here in a second.
Yeah, go ahead. Take a sip because I can hear your voice start cracking.
Yeah.
So let's go. Think about who they lost. They lose Tanev. They lose Hakanpää. They lose Dellandrea, Craig Smith, Scott Wedgwood, and Joe Pavelski. But they bring in Lyubushkin, Dumba, and Brendan Smith. Now, Brendan Smith's not even on here. They have Nils Lundqvist on here on dailyfaceoff.com, but he's not a guy that Pete DeBoer has a lot of faith and trust in. And I think, you plug Brendan Smith into that third pair and he brings that element of physicality. I think, Brendan Smith is a good leader. I think that he probably has a similar reputation that Craig Smith has. So it's kind of a 1-for-1. You're getting chirped in the comments here, Johnny, already, but what else is new? I think that especially with a guy like Matt Dumba, look at the last couple of seasons for, Seguin and Jamie Benn and then Matt Duchene. Like, it feels like those three players' careers have been, I don't think the word revived is fair because these guys have had really good careers, but they've kind of gone back up another level rather than fading out into their mid-30s. And I think a lot of that is because of Robertson and Johnson and Ropahintz and Haskin, and they've sort of taken the focus off those big dogs and let them slide into more, secondary roles. And those guys have completely flourished in those quote unquote secondary roles. And while last year, as you kind of see what the lineup could look like, the other big question mark here is Maverick Bourque. He was a first-round pick in 2020. He's played one game in the National Hockey League, but he had 77 points in 75 games in the American League last year, which is no small feat. Is he ready to jump in there and play center for that team? Then all of a sudden you could have Johnston on that top line wing, and it just gives you a little bit more flexibility. You have two centers basically on your top line, which I think most teams really like. So there's things to be excited about in Dallas, Johnny. And I think one of the biggest things that has propelled them the last 2 years is the balanced scoring that they've had.
I was going to get into that next.
They really just seem to spread it out all over the lineup.
They had 8 players with 20-plus goals last year, 2 of those having 30-plus in Wyatt Johnson. And Jason Robertson actually had a down year last year. Didn't even hit the 30 mark, but it was Rupahintz who had 30. So Johnson and Hintz both, 30-plus. And then the rest, Robertson, Pavelski, Duchene, Ben, all these guys, Seguin, Marchment, 20-plus goals. The thing is, how big of a loss is Joe Pavelski really going to be? Because he was second on the team in scoring, 67 points, a huge threat on the power play. How are they going to replace him? Johnson is going to fill in that spot. Is that what we're thinking? That he plays first line right wing, maybe takes the net front on the power play. Joe Pavelski obviously had a bit of a slow playoff last year and didn't really help propel them over the hump. But that balanced scoring, like you said, Colby, the only team with 8 players with 20-plus goals. I mean, every other team, there are some teams that had 6-plus players, some teams that had 5, but Dallas was the only one at the top there with the balanced scoring. And then another thing, too, that I feel like is kind of sneaky, Jake Ottinger didn't have his best save percentage last year. Obviously, still a strong season in net, but only a plus 1.9 goals saved above expected. He wasn't really above and beyond last year. Scott Wedgwood was a pretty good backup goalie last year, having 16 wins. That's kind of hard to find. I feel like 16 is a lot for a backup. And now they have Casey DeSmith backing up Ottinger.
Who's he's just as good of a backup goaltender. I mean, you're not getting a true number one starter, but you're getting a guy who can take minutes from Ottinger.
He had 12 wins last year in Vancouver.
Here's the X factor on Ottinger, something you didn't bring up that I think you have to bring up. He's in a contract year. So, I think the best players generally respond really well in contract years because they understand that, the chips are down and they've got to set themselves up for, a contract. And I think Ottinger has probably faced a little bit of criticism for his playoff performances. And so I think this is his opportunity to show everybody that, he deserves to be on that level of being paid, not on the Jeremy Swayman or Shesterkin or probably Sorokin level type of goaltender yet, but he probably is a guy who's looking to get $6.5 million a year or something like that, depending on what those other guys get, and how the market gets quote unquote reset. We spent a lot of time talking about that yesterday. So I think
he's making
big
$4
contract
right now.
year. What?
He's making $4 million right now.
Right. And so you take in inflation, the cost of $1, you take in the cap going up. I mean, this is a guy who's going to want $6.5 million. I mean, what else would he ask for? He probably wants an 8-year extension. He probably wants $6.5 million. And I'd say that's probably a pretty nice deal. Gary Bettman said the cap's going to at least go to $92.5 million next year. So up another, 4.5 or something like that from the 88. So, you're going to have to give a couple million of that to your goaltender, which you should when you have a guy like Ottinger. I think most teams would be really happy to have a guy like Ottinger.
And one more thing to add just before we kind of move into the next team here, because we're going to have to move, pretty quickly here because 8 teams to get to. And, we got some guests coming up and whatnot, but the special teams for Dallas, their power play finished 6th at 24.2%, and their penalty kill finished 8th at 82%. This year, their first unit looks like Miro Heiskanen, Wyatt Johnston, Jason Robertson, Rupa Hintz, and Jamie Benn as the first unit. Pretty loaded first unit. I don't imagine their power play being any worse than 6th, right? I would imagine, if anything, they're going to bump a little bit higher. I mean, 24.2% is good, but I'd say right now, the average in the NHL, like if you want to be really good on the power play, you got to be at least 25. I mean, it's changed a little bit, right? It used to be like 20% in the power play, 80% in the PK, but now with the scoring, I feel like 25 is now that benchmark.
Yep. So I think we both agree, though. I think Dallas should have an opportunity to repeat, and I do think it'll be interesting to see if they get this Ottinger contract done, like if they wait or if it gets done quickly. Again, if you're Ottinger, you're not doing anything until Swayman and Shesterkin go, because you're not at that level. Like you're not going to get that. And I saw a comment in the chat, 8 mil from J-Rock, 7.5 from Neil. That just might be too high based on the fact that it'll depend on what Swayman gets. Like I think if Swayman gets 8.25 or 8.5, then I think probably 7 is an achievable number for Ottinger. But I don't think they would want to go above 7 just based on the fact that, you heard the Bruins, they're fighting with Swayman. They don't even want to give Swayman 8, depending on which side of the story you believe. So we'll see what happens. I don't see him getting 8 either. Ottinger, I just don't, based on Swayman. And I think
I like your prediction at 6.5.
Yeah, I think 8 years, $6.5 million. Maybe it's 7, maybe 6, 8, 5, something like that. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there. Let's buzz on to the Winnipeg Jets here, because I think this is where you and I start to, I don't want to say differ, but have a difference of opinions here. A great season last year for Winnipeg. They lose Brossoit, Delia, Brendan Dillon. They lose Monahan, obviously, to Columbus, and they lose to Foley. And they bring in Capo Kakinen to back up, Colin Miller on the back end, and then Hayden Fleury, who I don't even think is on a one-way contract. I believe he's on a two-way contract, based on what I looked at last night. They also brought in Dylan Coghlan from Carolina, who had, I think, been playing in the minors, but has had some stints in the National Hockey League. I don't know. Like, I don't foresee Winnipeg having 110 points this year and finishing second in this division. I just don't see it.
No, but you also have to imagine that Connor Hellebuyck, who was lights out last year, has a chip on his shoulder after the first round exit this year. I mean, he was pretty bad in the playoffs. Very disappointing performance for Winnipeg in that first round against Colorado. They go down in 5 games. I don't think anyone would have anticipated that. But my question is, what do we think about the Winnipeg Jets centers? Like, down the middle, they're just not very scary. I mean, Mark Scheifele, Vladislav Nemesnikov, Adam Lowry, and Rasmus Kupari. Lowry's heavy. Their third line can play a little heavy. Nino Niederreiter can score goals too. And Mason Appleton is solid. He's fine. But I'm not threatened by the Winnipeg Jets centers. They don't scare me for.
I mean, I think Scheifele is threatening. I mean, you look at that.
He's the only one. I mean, he's the only one.
You look at that top line with Velarde. Being
already had 22 goals last year in 47 games. Had he stayed healthy, who knows?
Right. He's probably a guy who's going to score some goals this year. Yeah, Nemestikov, like that second line, you're right. There's not a lot of heaviness to that second line. And I know Ehlers plays bigger than his size, so I do want to give him credit. But I agree. Like, this isn't a real threatening group of forwards. I think you lose Monahan. I think you lose to Foley. I think that hurts. I mean, you just look at what they lost versus what they brought in. I don't know. And then you look at the back end, which has been, a strength of their team.
Mm-hmm.
And they only have
hockey last year.
They only have 5 defensemen that are healthy on one-way deals. So between Hayden Fleury and Coghlan, they're both probably going to make the team. And if we have any, I know we have Chef Richard here in the chat. Happy New Year to you as well, by the way. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Like, what are the thoughts about the back end, and are you feeling good with the fact that you're going to see Fleury or Coghlan every night, probably for a while? They've got a couple of injuries to a couple of their defensemen. I think Stanley and Hanoila, I don't know if I'm saying his name completely right. He never really seems to cement himself as a regular, are both out. So I think there's questions on the back end, like who's going to play on the third pair. And then I think you combine that with the fact that, Kaapo Kähkönen is probably not a real, steadying backup goaltender. So I know you're looking at Winnipeg and you're like, do they need to rest Hellebuck more during the regular season? Is this why he isn't performing in the playoffs? He's one of these goalies that still plays a lot. And I just don't know. I don't know. I don't know what their plan would be like to get Kähkönen more starts. I think that you're looking at you're looking at the Winnipeg Jets and you're thinking like they lost a little bit more than they added, and coming off of the playoff disappointment, like how does that fare?
And we also talk about teams with balanced scoring. We just talked about the Dallas Stars. You look at the scoring last year from Winnipeg, they had 4 guys with 60 points or above, and then a huge drop off to Cole Perfetti, who had 38 points. Like, there's not much balance there for the Winnipeg Jets scoring wise. I think what saved them last year was obviously Hellebuck, like you mentioned, and they were the best technically defensive team in hockey. They only allowed 2.41 goals against per game. They had that crazy streak of allowing 3 goals or less. I think it was like 34 straight games or something like that it got to. So the question is, who's going to put the puck in the net for the Winnipeg Jets this year? That's what it is for me. I mean, they'll probably get the goaltending from Hellebuck, but you shut down that first line. Who's putting the puck in?
You also have a brand new head coach too.
Scott Arniel. Yes,
Scott Arniel. I mean, I shouldn't say brand new. I mean, he's been around. A lot of people were questioning that hire. Namely, I think Mike Commodore all over social media. Was that him that was just railing on the fact that one of the guys that is like funny, a former NHLer, I think it was Commodore, right? Do you remember that or no? When he was
I don't remember who it was, but I do remember it.
Absolutely crushing Scott Arniel. So how do the guys react to Scott Arniel? Like, does he change things defensively? I don't know, but you're right. If this team is going to be really good again and be a playoff team, and I think they're still probably a playoff team. They're probably a wild card.
We'll get into our ranking at the end of the episode, like where we think teams will finish this year.
Okay, well, I'm just saying I still think they're probably a wild card team, but I do think goals are going to be harder to come by. I see Chef Richard says Perfetti will have a breakout season. I don't know. I'm not sold on him yet, but you probably watch him more than I do. So I'll give you the benefit of the doubt on that, but he's never really given me the feeling based on the way he plays. Like, is he a guy that's really going to go get inside the dots and score 25 goals, like, score 30 goals in the NHL? I'm not sold on that. If that's really going to happen. So
not a very big body.
It was Mike Commodore, by the way. Vic is hitting us in the chat, telling us that was Mike Commodore, who was absolutely railing on Scott Arniel. I actually played with Jamie Arniel, who was his nephew. We played in the American League together for a couple of years. He was a good player and he was a great guy, a lot of fun. He never really talked about his uncle. I think his uncle was a Rangers coach at the time when we were. Was he an assistant coach for the Rangers, Scott Arniel?
Personally, I don't remember.
Okay, so you're like 12 years old. I always forget that. So All right, so let's keep moving along here, Johnny, and let's bring in Barstool Chief because we're gonna bump over to the Blackhawks. Look at this hair this early in the morning. Look at that
fresh
hair.
cut yesterday, boys. Fresh cut, ready for the year.
I love it. So you excited about your Blackhawks this year? They finally added some veteran support for Connor Bedard. You think he can score 40 this year? That seems to be the big question. I mean, he doesn't even touch 30 last year in his rookie season, but everyone all of a sudden is saying 40 goals for Connor Bedard.
Yeah, I think it's possible because he's going to have genuine NHL talent around him. I still think they're going to finish in last place, but
you do.
I think they might be 20 points better in the standings and still finish last. So I think so. You asked me if I'm excited about the Blackhawks. No. No, I'm going to watch.
The Bears won this week.
Yeah, I'm glad hockey's back. I hope they figure out how to get it on TV before the season starts. Because that's still up in the air, at least locally here. So
the brain trust of Chicago, they just swing and a miss.
Yeah, it's been a tough slog here, but I like what Kyle's building. I think they improve the team certainly. We'll see how the chemistry is with Bertuzzi or Teravainen or what those lines end up looking like. I think it's possible for Bedard to get 40 because I think they're going to have the puck a little bit more. They're not going to be so bogged in this year. Yeah, so that's looks like left wing lock right there with the graphic. And but yeah, so then having Taylor Hall in there, Kurashev gets a slide down a spot. I would probably have Dickinson in that top 6, but there's plenty of time to work all that out. But they at least have
an NHL roster,
12 guys that belong in the NHL. So that's quite the improvement.
Let me ask you about Lukas Reichel, because in my notes here, I put this is a make or break season for him to decide if he's an NHLer or not. And obviously I've seen a lot of him, as I know you have as well, but I didn't get to see last year that often. There wasn't really a great reason other than Connor Bedard to flip them on at times. So I'm curious from your standpoint, because this is a kid who was a first round pick and pre-Bedard was kind of like the shiny object in Chicago. Do you think that this guy's an NHLer, or do you think he's not even as a third liner? He's not a long-term guy there in Chicago.
Yeah, I don't think his style lends itself to be like a true bottom 6 guy. So it's kind of top 6 or bust for him, and I think it's going to be bust. So he was drafted by Bowman, so he's not really one of their guys. He's in the last year of his. They gave him like he got some kind of an ARB deal for this year. So he's got 1 year left. They have skill guys like Oliver Moore and Frankie Nazar kind of knocking on the door within the next 12 to 18 months, sooner than that for Nazar. So it's just like he's going to get squeezed, and I hope he has a big year and then they can flip him for a little something. Who knows? But I don't think when the Hawks are good again, I don't think Reichel's on the team.
Yeah.
Well, I'm happy you mentioned Nazar and Oliver Moore. I'm a big Oliver Moore fan. Interviewed him after he was drafted a couple years ago in Nashville. He's a stud of a kid, really funny personality. Yeah. And obviously had a good year at Minnesota last year. But with those two guys, and this conversation is going to start sooner or later. And I was actually talking to a buddy of mine, Stefan Rosner, who covers the Islanders yesterday, and he was the one who brought it up. Chief, would you get rid of those two guys and maybe a draft pick to try to get Jeremy Swayman to be your goalie? Swayman's young enough where like him and Bedard can kind of come up together. I mean, listen, this is obviously a hypothetical conversation, but it could be real. It could be real based on how things are going. Who knows?
I think that
Chicago's a team that,
What's that?
Chicago's a team that I would think Swayman would.
Yeah, I think if they didn't even attempt to go get Askarov, they're not going to do it for Swayman. Mm-hmm. So I don't think they're thinking that way. And that price tag you laid out, which is probably fair, is probably too steep for the Hawks because outside of Bedard up front, they don't really have much else. Yeah. So they have to have Nazar and Moore hit as prospects to kind of, if you're filling out that top 9, those are for, in 2026 and 2027, those guys have to be there. And if you take them away, well, then you're just trying to backfill that with free agents who are going to be more expensive. So I like Swayman. Mm-hmm. I don't think he's a fit for the plan. He's definitely a fit for what they don't have. They don't really have a goalie of the future. Because I don't know what you guys think about Comesso, but I don't think he's really shown enough to be like, oh, he's a slam dunk guy. I mean,
you're the BU kid, right?
Yeah, he's a BU kid.
He is, but I didn't watch him play once last year. I saw what his numbers were, and I heard that he showed stretches, but yeah, I mean, I don't know the answer to that question either. That position in the National Hockey League to me is it's a little bit of a crapshoot with some of these young guys.
I think they'll patchwork the goalie over the course of this thing. And that's what they always did. They kind of lucked out on Crawford, but then they took Darling as a free agent. They found Ray Emery, and he had a great run with them. They always
and so did Scott. Darling had an awesome run. I mean, unlikely. What his story is incredible. And he
got that money. He got that money.
And I remember in that Nashville series, he came in and played some games in that Nashville series in round 1 and gets a couple of big wins. And then, eventually they got back to Crow, but it seemed like he was that perfect little like, all right, we just need a Band-Aid for like the next 72 hours. And there was our boy, Scott Darling, to be that.
Yeah, and they don't win that cup in 15 without him. Like he was very pivotal for that series. So he came in relief. They were down 3-0. I think it was game
Nashville,
2.
Right?
Yeah, game 2 in 2015, the first round, and stabilized things because Crawford, I don't know what happened to him that game. And they came back and won that game.
He made that insane save on the back door against Colin Wilson.
Yeah,
we had on the show.
Yeah. So they've always managed the previous regime always kind of managed to do that, and they did draft Crawford, but that was actually pre-Bowman. So they've really for almost 20 years now they have struck out on draft picks. So they have all defensemen, which I think that Vlasic, I guess, he's a stud. So that streak has ended, but they went like 20 years without having a goalie or a defenseman play significant games for them in the NHL. As they're drafted and developed. So they've been a mess for longer than I think the national media market realizes.
Well, because they won 3 Stanley Cups.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I mean, like
totally. But
wouldn't really call that a mess.
But that wasn't the Bowman regime. Like most of that was built by Talon and Smith before them. So it was tough sledding here with this group for a long time. And it was like when it started to go, I think you kind of you knew it was going to get real bad real quick because there were no reinforcements coming from anywhere.
I'd say the Minnesota Wild are more of a mess.
Yeah, well, I mean they also have $15 million in dead cap space, and
but just for one more year, right?
Yeah, just one more year, and then it drops down to, I have it written down here, 1.6 million the next 4 years. So, Here's what I want to say to you. I want to say that I don't agree with you that Chicago's going to finish last.
I agree with that too.
I'm looking at them on paper, and I'm looking at the fact that you've given kind of a new lease on life to a couple of these players that I wrote, whether it's Mikheyev, whether it's Craig Smith. You're giving TJ Brody an opportunity to kind of play in a less stressful situation. I think Brossoit has an opportunity to take the net, and not that Peter Mrazek hasn't done an admirable job, and a guy that I really liked in Chicago as a human. Like he was a great guy to be around, and I'm rooting for him. And I think he's actually been better than people realize who don't watch the Blackhawks. There are games where they've been in games that they had no business over the last 3 years because of Mrazek. So I think that they're a team that could get ahead of Minnesota, ahead of Utah. And looking at St. Louis roster, like I think that there's a chance St. Louis takes the biggest plunge. And I think Chicago could finish maybe 6th out of 8th in this division. Like that's kind of where I see them getting to ahead of St. Louis and Utah. And I think part of that is because Connor Bedard, look how good he was with no one last year.
No, totally.
I think he could have like an insane year where it is 40 goals and it is 100 points. Like I think he could do it.
Yeah, and that's what it would take. It would take him, because in my head he could be between 80 and 90 this year. 90 points for a 19-year-old with that team, I'd feel great. It's just I have this mental block where you look at what they finished at last year, and it was like 52 points. And it's like if you add 25 points to that, that is a huge improvement.
There.
And if you added 25 points to that team last year, I think they would have finished 8th. Yeah. So it's hard for me to be like, well, they're going to make up this gap because they got Bertuzzi and Teravainen and Mikheyev and Taylor Hall's back, and that's great. But in my head,
Martinez, TJ Brody, like I know they're not guys to go and get like throw a party for, but like, look, no disrespect to Isaac Phillips and no disrespect to some of these guys. If you're plugging them in as your 6th and 7th, you're okay. It's when you need Isaac Phillips to go play a regular shift and play against the top line, and he's just not ready for it. Maybe he gets ready eventually. Vlasic's another year older and another year. This is like his first year where he's like, okay, I know the league now. Now it's time to like, so I don't know. Maybe I'm falling back into, I want Kyle and that staff to do well so badly because they're such good people. But I do think that they could, like, I see them being formidable this year, but still not saying they're a playoff team, but I find them, I think 6th is the number. That's what I think.
Well, hopefully they're a little exciting, or else the Winter Classic is going to be a total fucking dud.
The scenery will be great. I was there in 2009, the first time in Wrigley. It was spectacular. Now, I did talk to a guy on the team, and he's a new guy to the team. I don't want to like out him, but he was feeling pretty confident about the group. So for whatever that's worth. And I do think part of me where I'm like, they're going to finish last. I do want to watch like competent hockey because it's been a while since we've had that here. So I'm fine with like the 25-point improvement. My heart of hearts, I think they need another top 5 pick for this group.
Yeah. So you're rooting for them to lose all year again?
No, because I it's like this Chinese finger trap going on in my brain because I need them to win every game. But I know that they need one more impact forward. And it's like people talk about the money they have, the cap space they have. Chicago's a great destination. These guys just don't become available. So it's very hard to go and be like, oh, we're going to go get Draisaitl or somebody like that. They always just re-sign. So I do think they need one more impact, preferably guy over 6'1" to play with Bedard.
Didn't I read something about Kirill Kaprizov wanting to go to Chicago? Did I see that?
I texted people about that, and they said there's just nothing to it.
Okay.
So
we'll see. I saw that though.
Yeah, no, that would be great. That would be great. But again, like his deal's up when the 2 Minnesota dead money guys are essentially off the books. They'll just give him the bag, and I think
Yeah. All right, Chief. Well, that's all I got for you, Colby.
Yeah.
Unless you have any final thoughts.
Listen,
we appreciate you coming out here this morning.
They're going to get national TV games, so them being good is good for hockey overall. It really is.
They have 9. I think they have 9 Wednesday games this year. So,
of course they do.
But thanks for having me, boys. I enjoy the show. I tune in on Twitter quite a bit. So I'm glad you guys are back.
We'll check in with you after, because this is the most rational I've heard you talking about sports. You see, and I know every Sunday for you is a roller coaster. Like your Twitter, it hurts my heart on Sundays sometimes because I know how bad you want that team to be good. And I know right now they're toying with you every Sunday. One weekend it's a little of this, one weekend it's a little of that. And
brother, I would take one team being solid. It's been nobody has won a playoff series in Chicago since the 15 Blackhawks. So we're looking at 10 years.
True? Wow.
Yes.
Wait, no. What about didn't the Cubs win the fucking World Series? Yeah,
won the World Series in 16. So it's from 16 because I did the tweet where it's been like I did the math, and it's been like 1,400 days since we won a playoff game or something insane. So I would love it since we've been full time at Barstool. 0 sports success.
Well, hopefully that changes. And say hi to PB for me when you talk to him. I'm happy to see he slid over to the new network. I think that was a great decision that they made to keep him.
I think I would have stormed the office.
Yeah. I mean, what a steadying voice for a situation that's had anything but for the last 5 years. So we'll check in with you again. Let's make this a thing where we get the Blackhawk vibe pulse check from you every little bit. Okay.
I would love that. I think it's going to be darker than you guys are anticipating.
All right, we'll see. Hey,
nobody touches the beautiful boy.
So we'll see.
Yeah, that's right. Hands off. He got into it last night with that.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, we'll see.
All right, we'll check in with you soon. Thanks,
boys.
Paul.
Appreciate it. All right, that was awesome. Big thanks to Barstool Chief for coming on. Let's move on to the next team that we're going to talk about, which is the Colorado Avalanche. And Colby, I'm just going to say it right now. The West does not run through Colorado this year. I'm not high on the Avs this year. I don't know what it is. I feel like the depth just isn't what it was. You look at their lineup, you look at their forward group, and I'm just, obviously outside of McKinnon and Rantanen and, unknowing what will happen with Nichushkin if he comes back in November and Landeskog if he can stay healthy. I just don't know how I feel about this forward group right now with Colorado.
Well,
Avalanche.
it does sound like Nichushkin is on his way back. Like it does sound like wheels are in
Mid-November.
motion.
Yeah.
What?
For mid-November.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. So it does seem like he'll be rejoining this team. And I think that you got to realize too, like full season of Casey Middlestat, right? So he has an opportunity to, get more comfortable into the group. And I think Callum Ritchie is a guy who is a former first round pick for them, who is kind of poised to have a good season and potentially have a bit of a rookie breakout campaign. A couple of the other question marks that I put on here, you look at where they added, right? They added on the back end. It seemed to me like Colorado, they go out, they add Calvin DeHaan, they add Brandstrom to their back end, and Oliver Shillington as well. Vic, you forgot to add him to this, and I think with a guy like Oliver Shillington, go ahead, say it.
No, I was just giving Vic shit.
Okay, yeah. So I think Oliver Shillington has an opportunity. I don't want to call him an X factor. But, this was a guy who, and these obviously lines are from preseason. So, these aren't necessarily exactly.
I think Malinsky is going to make the team, though. He was great last year.
And he very well may, but you still have, you still have Shillington in the back end. And all I'm saying is before he had his leave of absence in Calgary a couple of years ago, he was a top 4 defenseman. Can he get back to that? I don't know. You put him around guys like Makar, Taves, Gerard, I still see a little bit of strength on their back end. And I just think when you have that type of top end, I don't think you can ever count a team like Colorado out. I still see Colorado as a playoff team, a team that is probably somewhere between, 95 and 100 point type of team. I just do. And partially is because I look around the division and really the only team that made massive changes was Nashville. Nobody else did anything crazy, and you got to think they're going to look to improve. They're not going to sit on their hands with this team. And then does Landeskog ever return? Do we know if and when he ever comes back, what are you getting?
Well, I wasn't saying I'm concerned about Colorado missing the playoffs. I think they're a lock to be in one of those first 3 spots. But last year, too, if you look at it, they were the best team on home ice, 31 wins last year. Georgiev actually had a pretty strong year. He also played 63 games last year. That's a lot for a goalie right now. I feel like most goalies aren't even playing north of 57 if you're a starting goalie. And the Landeskog thing, yeah, if he comes back, great. But he's now 2 years removed from playing a game. Even if he does come back healthy, it's still going to take him a bit to get going. This is something we talked about yesterday, Colby, right? You can be in shape, and people have said he looks jacked right now, but there's nothing like game shape. I mean, I can't imagine going 2 years without playing a game. He hasn't touched the ice in an NFL game since they won the Cup.
We saw with Couturier, and look, he had a rough year. He struggled. So
I don't think it's automatic, but again, we're talking about the highest scoring team in the league last year, 3.68 goals per game, 5th best power play, 12th best penalty kill. But again, they have the 3 guys, 3-headed monster, McKinnon, Rantanen, and Makar. I think Kale obviously is going to have another incredible year, 90 points last year as a defenseman in 77 games, 21 goals. He'll probably get 25 goals this year. He could even hit 30, I think. He's my pick to win the Norris. Not that that's a crazy pick. I mean, he's the best defenseman in the NHL. But, I watched a little bit of their preseason game last night, again, preseason, but they got shelled by Vegas. They lost 6-1 on home ice in preseason last year. And it just seems like, outside of those 3 guys, you can't really rely on anyone. Sure, Middlestat's a fine player. Ross Colton's a good third line guy, but looking at their roster, like I don't know if there's someone who's a guarantee to put up 20 goals.
Well, their bottom six is their Achilles heel. They just don't have the depth anymore. They've been picked apart over the last couple of years. When you start paying guys and you start winning, that's what happens. But look, I don't ever foresee Casey Middlestat being the perfect fit there in Colorado as a second line winger, or second line center. But I do think, given a full season, given training camp, given more familiarity, probably not living in a hotel anymore, I do expect more from Casey Middlestat. Like, I do expect him to fit in there because those players are so good. I think they're going to drag you along as long as you have the right attitude. And look, they did lose Trennan. They lost, Walker, the defenseman, who was a trade deadline guy. They lost Duhaime. I think Nishushkin is so important to get him back in when he does come back. And then, is Jonathan Drouin going to score goals? Is he going to be a 20, 25 goal scorer this year when he's healthy? I don't see why not. He's going to certainly get the opportunities. He's certainly going to be put in good situations to produce. So, does Colorado have the dominating season? No, but I do think, like Tampa, they're pointing out that they lost Byram. He was part of that trade. Here is something really interesting that has been brought to my attention this summer. I know this to be true. There was a deal on the table for Byram for Cutter Gauthier to Philly last year. Wow. That was a deal that was on the table. The holdup on this deal was that the Colorado Avalanche asked for one thing. They weren't willing to do it straight up, Byram for Cutter Gauthier. Yeah. They wanted an ancillary piece. And that's part of the philosophy in Colorado. They like to ask for one extra thing. When you look at the history of some of the trades that they've made. And I think Danny Briere felt like, I'm making this trade, so either do it for this 1-for-1 or we move on to the next one. I'll tell you what, Cutter Gauthier, could you imagine if they had Cutter Gauthier instead of
Drouin spot?
Instead of Anaheim? I mean, I think Cutter Gauthier probably would have fit into that lineup quicker, even as a college player coming in the spring, than Middlestat. I just think he's got way more game and way more upside than Casey Middlestat. So I think it was a need, and so they made the trade that they made with Byram. I don't think Byram was ever going to get to spread his wings there. But ultimately there's just not the depth. Like, the top end is as good as anybody in Colorado, but the depth is super average, which is why, I don't see them hitting that 107 point mark again. I say
under 100.
I think the number for them is somewhere between, I think, like 96 and 100 is probably the window that I would give for Colorado, just based on, again, some of the departures and some of the unknowns about their lineup. But if Cal Ritchie, as Frank Saravalli wrote, he wrote an article on Daily Faceoff about 10 breakout candidates, and he had him pretty high up that list. If he's a breakout season and you start to see stuff like that, they've got Sean Barons in the minor. He's a defenseman who just won a national championship at DU. He just won a couple national championships at DU. He's a guy who probably can come in at some point this season and start to acclimate to the National Hockey League. They're not a team to sleep on, that's for sure.
That's really all I got for Colorado right now. You want to move into what is probably the most exciting team that everyone is looking forward to watching this year in the Nashville Predators?
Let's talk Nashville. I think that's the group that everybody wants to hear about.
So they finished in a wild card spot last year, but improved drastically. Special teams were pretty weak last season. 16th ranked power play at 21.6%, 22nd ranked penalty kill at 76.9%. Here's the thing that I feel like nobody has talked about. Philip Forsberg, who's probably one of my favorite guys in the NHL, by the way, the nicest man on the planet. I've got to hang out with him a bit the last 2 years in Vegas, the Player Media Tour. 48 goals last year. 2 away from 50. I feel like no one really mentioned that. He's always been a big scoring threat, but he really popped off last season. And then, on top of adding the guys like Brady Shea, Steven Stamkos, and Jonathan Marchessault, I don't know why I started with Brady Shea and those three. UC Saros had a pretty bad year last year in net. So you think he, finds his game again and really goes above and beyond after signing that extension this year? Nashville is a team that could potentially win this division.
Look, just based on the fact that they added Stamkos, Marchessault, Shea, Carrier, and Wedgwood, and they lost Beauvillier and Zucker. Like, yeah, I mean, you talk about the team that improved the most on paper in the offseason. It's an easy one to point at. And I do believe that they'll be the biggest movers. I think they finished with 98 points last year. And you're right, they were a wild card team. Look, they're going to push Dallas. I think they're going to finish ahead of Colorado, and I think they're going to finish ahead of Winnipeg. Like I think they're the team that finishes second in this division.
I had the same thing.
The only thing I will say, and the only sort of question marks that I have around it, are the fact that you take a guy like Steven Stamkos out of Tampa, and it's not necessarily going to be an immediate perfect fit.
Yeah.
It's not that he won't impact games, but like,
the way he did in Tampa,
there's a human element to being traded or for him signing with another team that people really never take into account, which is why a lot of times when you see a player traded during the season, it could take 3 months before they really start to fit in. And I'm talking things change from, where you live, where your family is living, what restaurant you're eating your pregame meal at, if you are a restaurant guy, or if you're a eating at home guy, the grocery store you're going to might not have exactly what you're used to. Like, and I know these things sound pretty dumb and sound pretty trivial, but they're not. They're really not. They can affect a guy like Steven Stamkos, who's been in the same situation, basically with the same coach for as long as anybody can remember. I mean, I know we had people before John Cooper, but I'm just saying, like, it's you take a guy out of his environment that he's so used to living in, and that can affect you. Like it really can. But at the end of the day, you look at that first power play unit and what they're able to bring, and you're just wondering, like, how could this power play unit not be the best power play in the NHL? And the last little note that I put down here, that first power play unit will have Josi, Stamkos, O'Reilly, Forsberg, Marchessault. That's kind of how they're planning to line up. How is Gustav Nyquist going to be affected by this? Because he had 75 points last year. His previous high, 53 points. Okay. And then 24 of his 75 points were on the power play. And how much power play time is Gustav Nyquist really going to get this year, Johnny? So his scoring probably goes down. Granted, the other guys are looked at to produce. And I see a comment, Tommy Novak, 80-point season incoming. Yeah, I think that's going to be hard for a guy who's going to get very limited power play minutes. We have this conversation about your boy Lafreniere in New York all the time. It's hard to get to that elite level of scoring without first line power play minutes. You can make the argument why, but it's real.
But I want to argue one thing, because I feel like the conversation was similar last year with Pittsburgh. I mean, you look at the Penguins power play, 4 Hall of Famers on it, maybe even 5. And their power play was fucking horrendous last year. So I don't think it's an automatic that Nashville's power play is just going to be lights out. I mean, obviously, you look at that first unit and you probably do have 4, if not 5 Hall of Famers, future Hall of Famers on it. But just because it's loaded like that, they haven't done anything together yet. I'm not sure it's a guarantee that it's going to click right away.
It's never a guarantee, but
I feel like everyone has that same thought, though, that like you look at, Stamkos, Forsberg, O'Reilly, Marchessault, and Josi, and it's like,
okay, but let's break it down a little bit, Johnny. Let's break it down a little bit here. Roman Josi's your top guy.
Yes,
he's kind of your alpha as far as with the puck. Okay, Ryan O'Reilly is not necessarily an alpha with the puck. Ryan O'Reilly is like become a premier net front guy. He'll hang out on the goal line. He'll be out in front of the net. So O'Reilly is not a guy that needs the puck on his stick a lot. Steven Stamkos is a shooter. He's not the guy who holds onto it and runs up and down the.
But Forsberg was the shooter the previous years, I feel like.
Okay, so let's
where does he
go? It. Forsberg's probably, Forsberg and Marchessault are 2 guys. Like Forsberg and Josi have figured it out, right? Yeah. To me, the reason power plays can fail, it's not because you have too many shooters. It's because you have too many guys that need the puck to run through them. And I'm looking at this. The only guy that maybe concerns me a little bit would be Marchessault, because I think he's used to the puck running through him a little bit. Now, Marchessault's never been a true superstar, though. He's always had true superstars, whether it's Eichel, Pietrangelo. So, like, I don't think Marchessault, he's always been more of a shooter and a finisher as well. So when I look at this power play, do I think it necessarily is a guarantee? Absolutely not. But the personalities of who needs the puck, to me, I think this could work. In Pittsburgh, Malkin needs the puck. Letang needs the puck. Carlson definitely needs the puck. You're not talking about a bunch of scorers and finishers. You're talking about a bunch of guys who the puck has to run through them. The power play has to run. You know, the term that is talked about, everywhere, where it's like the power play runs through so-and-so, right? And New York Marine has a comment here. Yossi isn't past his prime. Neither is Forsberg. Stammer can shoot. O'Reilly is kind of the face-off guy. Like, I tend to understand your point, Johnny, but I disagree. Looking at the personalities and the way that these guys are successful, I do think it works, and I think it works really well because of the way these guys like to operate offensively.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. Like you said, there are different kinds of players, but when you have that many shooters, and I guess the playmaker on this unit is probably Forsberg. I just don't know where you put Forsberg in the setup. Like, is he playing the goal line? Like, I would think so.
No, I think you have Forsberg in the bumper. I think you have O'Reilly at the net. And then I think you look at Stamkos on a flank. You look at Marchessault on a flank, and then you have Yossi at the top. Like, to me, that makes complete sense because, again, like, you're a shooting threat from the bumper, but you're also a passing threat. You've got Marchessault and Stammer.
I feel like Stamkos might be in the bumper, honestly, too.
No way. With his one-timer, you're not going to take away the guy's greatest skill at the end of his career and take him off the flank. No way. He already scored a couple of goals from the one time.
Yeah, I saw the one against Florida. Yeah.
And with a guy like O'Reilly, who's great in front of the net, he could still roll off the goal line and be an outlet for the flanks and then make plays into the slot to Forsberg. Like, the more we talk about this, the more I'm sure you're wrong.
I'm just thinking out loud, though. Like, Forsberg, though, is the guy who, like, makes everything kind of happen on that unit. So having him in the bumper, I feel like, is a waste for him.
But I also completely disagree with that. That power play has been run through Roman Yossi. Like, Roman Yossi is the alpha on that power play. Like, there's no way you're watching Nashville and telling me anything otherwise. Like, Roman Yossi is the quarterback.
Obviously, he's the quarterback of it.
Right,
obviously.
He's the alpha dog. He's the guy who runs the power play. You know, you can have as many good shooters as you want. He facilitates everything. And if you think about it, you drop the puck, you put the puck down to the right flank, which would have Marchessault, and then he has a one-touch play into the middle, into the bumper for Forsberg. Now, all of a sudden, Forsberg is so dangerous. And if they want to cheat to Forsberg, then all of a sudden your flanks can start walking down the walls, and O'Reilly becomes an option. So I don't know, man. And with Andrew Burnett, who's an offensive coach, like, I don't see how this power play doesn't work. I really don't. I mean, I think that the people in the chat are in agreement.
Yeah, everyone's no, they're all agreing with you.
I don't have the concern that you have.
I'm just thinking out loud. I get why everyone would agree with you on this. I'm curious to see how it plays out. But
Look at New York. Look at what New York Marine.
I just saw
get that comment up on the screen, please, Vic, because I think this is in terms that Johnny can understand it.
But Panarin's not a bumper. Panarin doesn't play bumper. He plays
it always goes
side.
Back to him. But again, just because you're a bumper player, you're still on a one-timer.
That's why I'm saying Stamkos on the one-timer.
No, but listen, the bumper guy is still a one-timer option from the offside flank. A puck goes down to the flank and then comes into the bumper. Patrice Bergeron used to find that soft area all the time as a one-timer.
But that was my thought for Stamkos, because I think Forsberg is more of a playmaker in the flank than Stamkos is.
Yeah, I disagree. I totally disagree. I don't think there's any way, shape, or form Steven Stamkos is not in the spot that has made him a Hall of Famer throughout his career. I just don't agree.
Yeah, and that's perfectly fair. Again, I'm just like thinking as I talk here.
That never works out well for you, by the way.
I know. I know.
You need to formulate thoughts, and you need to come with them formulated. When
I
think
obviously
it gets ugly.
Looking at this team last night, I thought obviously their power play is going to be good, but now kind of looking at it again today and thinking about Forsberg's year last year, 94 points, pretty strong playmaker, I'd say, and can also score goals. Like, I don't know if that's like the automatic play. Maybe even throw Forsberg on the strong side and put Marchessault on the bumper.
Okay. I mean, you could again, I think there's going to be a lot of interchanging, and I think they're going to have to figure that kind of stuff out. But I think he's more of a shooting threat from the bumper than he is on a strong side moving downhill. I mean, but look, you look at why Tampa Bay's power play was always so successful. Braden Point was an unbelievably good bumper player. And then you had those two dangerous flanks. And then, Victor Hedman at the top. Like, there's a similar level of talent on that power play in Tampa Bay. Obviously, Kucherov is kind of a unicorn with how good he is. But I don't know. Like, the more we talk about it, the more confident I feel that this is so different than Pittsburgh. I think there's too many alphas that the play needs to run through, where I don't think that's the case in Nashville.
Yeah, I agree. I just wanted to bring that point up because, I think we all would have said the same thing about the Penguins last year. But let's move on to another team before we bring on Michael Russo. Let's talk about the St. Louis Blues.
Yeah, let's just hit St. Louis really quick.
Who finished fifth last year. We both agree. I actually had them finishing 8th this year as well. You have them finishing 8th?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're 7th or 8th place team is kind of like, I'm not in on Utah because you're the guy who is like running on vibes. So I'm not as heavy on Utah right now as you are. But yeah, I think St. Louis, like, what did they do? They overpaid Philip Broberg with an offer sheet. Okay, maybe he is, maybe he isn't. I'm not ready to say it based on a couple of playoff games, and he did play well, but he was an American League player most of last season. Now you're paying him almost $5 million. I think Dylan Holloway is a good, serviceable NHL player, but I don't see him as a top 6. They lose Krug for the season. They added Kapanen and Texier,
Texier. Alexander Texier.
I don't know. Like, I think this is a team. Like, what are they doing in St. Louis? Like, what is?
I was just gonna say, to me, their back end is slow. That is a slow decor, especially with.
Is their forward group not slow? Hold on. Before we go to back end,
Robert Thomas and Kyrou can fly.
Okay, but after that, who's a fast
Holloway's
player? Listen, I love Braden Shen, but is he a fast player? Like, he's not fast.
I think their third line is pretty speedy. Matthew Joseph can fly. Holloway's a strong skater. Fox has a big, heavy body. Like, their third line is solid.
But
I'll give them that.
Those guys, you've got 2 journeymen and an unproven guy who got an offer sheet. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I'm just not falling in love with that. And I see the comment, J-Rock, rebuilding on the fly. Like, yeah, how? Like, where's your rebuild in here?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I think they're going to take more steps back. This is Doug Armstrong's last year, right? Before he moves into like the president role. I think they're a team that finishes 7th or 8th. You can go back to their back end now. I know you wanted to make a quick point about their decor, but I'm really unimpressed with nothing about the St. Louis Blues make me excited. Ryan Suter.
The only guy who's a great skater out of those 6 to me is Nick Leddy. Only guy with some speed.
And you've got, your UMass guy, Matthew Kessel, who played about 40 games last year. What'd you say?
Unproven.
He played about 40 games last year. They're looking for another step. Nick Leddy's been a serviceable guy his whole career. Colton Parayko's talked about getting traded every other week, basically, at this point. Now that he's counted on to be like a top pair defenseman. But yeah, I think St. Louis is a bad team this year. Like, I think they're a team that's destined to finish, in the bottom, 5 or 10 of the National Hockey League.
I agree. And just one more point I wanted to make too, because I've talked about it with Dallas, with the balanced scoring. They did have 6 players last year with 20+ goals, and Jake Neighbors, 27 goals last year, 11 assists, crazy stat line for him, 38 points in 77 games. But guys like Brandon Saad, 26 goals. Huh?
Call that the Cy Young Award, yeah? 26 and 11.
What's that?
when a guy has a ton of goals and no assists, you never heard that expression. You ask a guy, you going for the Cy Young?
Isn't that like the best pitcher in baseball or something?
Well, what's a really good record for a pitcher? A lot of wins and no losses.
I don't know shit about baseball, but I guess
it's a term that you hear guys say on a bench or in a locker room or it's a chirp when a guy has a lot of goals and no assists. You ask them, you going for the Cy Young? It's like making fun of a guy going for the green jacket with their, and Mario Ferraro's minus for the century and he's going for the green jacket. So
got it. That one's new to me.
Yeah, well, a lot of things go right over your head. So we're in agreement.
Yeah.
The St. Louis Blues are a team that looks to regress. Like I hear them that they're rebuilding on the fly, but I don't know. Sounds like noise a little bit to me.
Well, let's bring on Michael Russo from The Athletic because we're about to get into the Minnesota Wild, who are a team that I'm not often kind to on this show. I've called them the Minnesota Wild previously as
and then
Chris
got
Kelleher.
called out.
Yeah.
And then Michael, he got called out by Chris Kelleher face to face. And I was standing there. That was the best part, that I got to witness him getting called out by the assistant general manager after dinner in Las Vegas. I mean, it kind of made my whole trip.
No, that's awesome.
Trip too. Yeah.
Yep. By the way, Colby, look up Brandon Duhaim's numbers 2 years ago. You want to talk about Cy Young? I think he had 9 goals and 1 assist, maybe.
Still the best. The best first NFL goal I've ever seen. He had dropped his stick in the crease, and the shot from the point hit the stick on the ice, and he was credited with the goal, I believe.
Yeah, I think it was his third goal that was actually a legit goal for the first time. His second goal was kind of similar to that, and Dewey, who I love. I mean, great dude, but had also the best solo lap in rookie history. He tripped in Anaheim on a puck and went down it's all over YouTube. And man, did the Wild give him grief for that, his teammates and things like that, because they're all lined up looking at the Jumbotron and they all saw
they're
it.
Hoping for that.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the reason for a rookie lap. It's hoping for some level of embarrassment.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I did his games in the Frozen.
He was on Providence. He did. You definitely did.
He was the Providence guy. Yeah. I do think I remember that. So
really good college player.
Yeah. He was a good player there. So
not the smartest dude. He's the one that picked on Marc-Andre Fleury last year and made it a year of terrorization. I mean, Fleury and then Dewey right before he's traded pulled a prank on Fleury's car, and that was the beginning of the end of not knowing that he was going to then be traded to Colorado, and the Wild would have 2 trips there back to back. It was not a great move.
Oh man, you never want to mess with Flower. He's a guy who has tentacles that run deep into the NHL, and he can strike from anywhere. So
did you guys see what he did last night?
No.
He wasn't playing in the game, so he put on a fake mustache, fake wig, and was part of the ice crew. And
no way.
Went by the Wild's bench and started chirping him as he's going by, and everyone was like, "Who the hell is? Who is this?"
Did they
guy?
not know it was him right away?
They didn't know until he went by. So So I'll probably be doing a note on that today.
Flower is probably the perfect guy to have on on a John Hines coach team. I honestly, and look, I think the world. Oh, here's the video.
That's amazing.
What a move. Just talking shit to all the boys. But, John Hines is a guy who I think players really respect a lot, and I think players will play really hard for. But Heinze's a very, serious guy. Like he's all business all the time. And I've known him since I'm a 17, 18-year-old teenager with the national development team and, through the BU connection and whatnot. So I think he tends to get more out of a roster than most coaches. Like he's had rosters that haven't had a lot of top men. So I do think he'll actually do wonders for this team, but I think Flower with his lighthearted personality, Michael, it will help just sort of
lighten the mood.
Exactly. Yeah. I think in a season that could be up and down.
You know what's so funny about John is, so I watched the Frozen Four with him last year with BU in it. Like it was awesome. So he and I went to a cigar bar that I actually went with Lazarus in Vegas, same exact cigar bar in Vegas, to do a sit down after he was hired coach, and the Wild had just been maybe mathematically eliminated from the postseason. So he and I did a Q&A. But for the first hour and a half of us just watching the game, just with the tape recorder off, he is actually hilarious. Like he does the most incredible impressions of guys like, David Quinn. And like, he's a very funny guy, really inquisitive. I totally enjoyed it, but you're right. The second I hit record on that recorder, he became John Hines again. And yeah, it's pretty funny. So hopefully he starts to show that personality here in Minnesota, because the one thing about all the coaches here, even Jacques, when he was here and I started my career here covering him, but Mike Yeo and obviously Bruce Boudreau and Dean Evison, I mean, they really let their personality. They're hilarious. They're fiery, and hopefully John shows that, because it's been a heck of a camp. I mean, you never know in camp, but he has pushed these guys to the limit. It has been hard.
He'll do that.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, Colby, like, it's pretty interesting because all these players have said it's the hardest camp they've ever had. And I brought this up to Kaprizov yesterday. He's like, what? He goes, tell my teammates to go to Russia for like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And then he started telling me about the training camps there, that they're like a month and a half. You go down, you go in the morning, you work out for like an hour and a half, then you go on a run, then you eat breakfast, then you go on the ice, then you eat lunch, then you go back on the ice. And he's like, and then he looks at me, he goes, a month and a half. He goes, this is 2 weeks. Like, it's pretty funny.
Bruce, I just wanted to kind of build on that a little bit with Kaprizov, because he's become, to me, if you really break down what an MVP is, I think Kaprizov is in that conversation every year, because without Kaprizov in Minnesota, I don't know what they have offensively. I mean, this guy is flirting with 100 points basically every year. This year is probably going to be the year that he gets it, in my opinion.
Well, they do have a guy by the name of Matthew Boldy. I don't think it's fair to leave him out of the conversation.
No. But Kaprizov carries that forward group. I mean, Boldy's a guy who gets maybe 60 points. Kaprizov's near 100 every single season. It's a huge drop off. Obviously, I'm not discrediting what Boldy does, but what Kaprizov does is above and beyond. This year, he's obviously the guy to be excited about, right? And it's Fleury's farewell tour. But I made that joke when you hopped on that I've called Minnesota the Minnesota Wild, but you look at their numbers and they're basically in like the 16 to 20s, even 30s in almost every category: power play, penalty kill, goals for, goals against. Outside of Kaprizov and maybe Boldy, and I guess we can say Faber too. Like, what is it about the Minnesota Wild that, like, I just don't know what their identity really is?
Yeah,
is that something that you've put a pin on?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I like the Minnesota Wild because I'm tired of everybody calling the Minnesota Mild. So at least this is now a new thing to put them right in the average team. Look, you're right. I mean, I've covered this team. This is my 20th season here and 30th covering the league, and I'm telling you, I mean, Wild fans, it's like they're not Columbus. They're obviously not Buffalo, but yeah, they get into the playoffs every year, but since 2003, they've won 2 playoff rounds. So they make the playoffs over almost every year, but they've been in this middle. And, I sat down, we met with Craig Leopold the other day, and then I had an exclusive interview with him a couple days ago, and that story will run next week. And he's been the owner here for 16 years. And part of it is absolutely not in his DNA to do a full rebuild. And maybe, the most prudent thing probably during this whole Parise Suter buyout pain was to do the full rebuild, because it bought you time. And even then they've tried to be competitive, and just what has it gotten them? And they haven't had any sustained long playoff runs. So, what they're trying to do is in the beginning of this buyout pain, they somehow managed under Dean Evison and incredible years by Kaprizov getting 108 points and 3 straight 40-goal seasons, as they had back-to-back 100-point years. And they're trying to get back to that sort of balanced scoring by having, spreading the wealth a bit, putting Matt Boldy on the second line, having guys like Eric Sinek play, but then get back to their identity of being, this hard-nosed team. They added Trennan, they added Lauko, they obviously have a healthy Foligno right now. And the hope is that they can grind you down on the forecheck and then go on along and build themselves into a playoff contender. So we'll see. It was proven last year that it's a lot easier said and done depth wise when you have to spend $15 million less than everybody else.
Crazy.
And so it's been a crazy 4 years, and now the hope is that after this year, where they again want to get back in the playoffs, that they are now going to ascend to being a true contender over the next 3 years. They have a lot of kids. The Zeev Boyum kid, who I think is phenomenal, that fell
He's
into their
be a
lap.
star. Oh my God, did he fall into their lap?
Yeah, and this Danil Yurov looks like he's going to be sort of the next great Russian that's coming over next year as well. So they've got some kids coming, and then if you could build it, build the culture around them, and obviously the biggest, most prudent thing that they're going to have to do is figure out a way to re-sign Kaprizov, because if he goes somewhere else, I mean, it is a start overtime.
Yeah, and excuse me, I didn't realize he had 108 points 2 years ago. That totally cleared my mind. So thank you for that. But kind of alluding to what you mentioned as well, like, you guys aren't the Columbus Blue Jackets. You're competitive every year, but it's never that extra step. I've actually said this to, a lot of my friends and just fans and people I know from Minnesota, because all the New Yorkers love to say, like, the Jets suck, the Mets suck, like all New Yorkers feel bad for themselves and whatnot. But I don't think there's any city or fan base that's been teased more than Minnesota, because you guys are always good, but never good enough. And not just in hockey, in like every single sport.
Yeah, no, trust me. Wild fans, Viking fans, Wolves fans, Twins fans know it. I mean, I think it's the most, it is the most years without a championship in all of North American major pro men's sports. And it is. I mean, hopefully this is the year of the Vikings. Although, if you ask any Vikings fan, they're just sort of waiting for the shoe to drop and the carpet to be pulled out from under them. It just seems to always happen. But you're right. I mean, look, the fans here deserve it. The cool part of my job at The Athletic, from a national standpoint, is I get to cover the playoffs every year, even if the Wild aren't in it. And so last year I covered the Florida Panthers for essentially 4 playoff rounds, and I got my start covering the Panthers. And I just the one, but it was funny because, like I'm running into guys like Luongo and Ed Jovanovski and Billy Lindsay on the ice after they won the Cup, guys that I covered at the beginning. I was talking about this last night with Scott Mellenby, who is the second captain I covered in Florida as well. And the only thing I could think of on the ice there is how Minnesota deserves this, even though I should have been almost like thinking, wow, like this is cool. I was in this building in a hard hat in 1998. But Wild fans deserve this. They have, from the moment they got the North Stars back, for when the North Stars left and they got an expansion team back in 2000, they have filled this building and filled this building and filled this building from start to finish. It's amazing the support that this organization gets. Craig Leopold even said last night that their season ticket renewals after missing the playoffs, that they were shocked that it was at 90%. So the fan base here deserves it. This is a hockey mad market in a hockey mad state with hockey mad fans. And it's about time that they, and they know it, that they build themselves an actual serious contender, not just a playoff contender, a serious contender. And the concern that I always have when you're in the middle is, like, last year it was awesome that Zeev Boyum fell to them, because there were some people that thought that he was going to go top 2 or 3. But this team, as good as their prospect pool has been the last 5 or 6 years, they're still drafting 20 every year. And where other teams are stockpiling these picks. And look, there's no guarantee. Buffalo has been lousy forever. Detroit still, it's like, let's see it. Ottawa, again, let's see it. San Jose, Anaheim, like, eventually these teams, though, are like, somebody's going to pop and soar past them, while the Wild are sort of in the middle with sort of high-end talent, but not high-end talent. And so that's my biggest concern, is that they just always seem to be spinning in the mud, and they've got these plans, but because they're always in this win now mode, because they want to keep that building filled, they never sort of are bad enough to go out and get lucky with a Connor Bedard or something like that.
Like the Islanders.
It's like the Flyers. The Flyers have done the same thing. They haven't done it. And the funny thing with the guy, like, when you look at Zeev Boyum falling past the Flyers in the draft, I can't help but look at the fact that Zeev Boyum has the same agent as Cutter Gauthier and Ryan Johansson, and thinking to myself, the Flyers probably don't pick Boyum because of that, because they're worried they're going to have that situation on their hands. And that's how he falls to you guys. I watched that kid play from ice level last year. You mentioned the Frozen Four. I mean, that kid is a game-breaking, superstar-level talented kid who is playing for a very pro-style coach at Denver, and I think will actually adjust well, going from David Carl to John Hines, because I think there's a similar level of demand that those two coaches put on players. So I do have a couple of questions here for you, and some of them I want to get into the nitty gritty on a little bit as far as the roster goes. But the first one I want to start with is actually, it's a little broader. And the question it is like, because I'm a huge Bill Guerin fan as a human being, like I really love every time I get to run into Bill Guerin and chat with him. And, you know, we talk about the Jersey Shore. I mean, he's right down the road from us in the summer, but does he get a pass on some of this sort of mid-level play that they have because of $15 million? I know I'm rounding up here in dead cap space. Like, how are you supposed to operate? Think about the two players you could have on your roster for $15 million. It's mind-blowing to think about. Does ownership give him a little bit of a longer grace period because of that reason?
Yeah. Well, first of all, to that point, I mean, there's really no heat on Bill Guerin. I know a lot of people just looking from afar are saying that he's on the hot seat and all that stuff. I can tell you from talking to Craig Leopold that there is zero heat on him. He's told me that in our exclusive interview 2 days ago. He told that to all of us reporters yesterday as well. And part of it is because they have this plan that had been put forth, starting with the Parisi and Suter buyouts. I remember when I was at the Star Tribune before I came to the Athletic, it was about 3 years, 2014 or 15. So three years roughly after Parisi and Suter signed here. I sat down with Bill Daly to talk about the cap recapture, and he basically was not budging on this retroactive punishment that he put on the Wild. And I wrote this giant story that basically said that they better win this cup in the first 8 or 9 years, because the last 3 or 4, it's going to be somebody else's problem to just get out of this shit. And it turned out to be exactly like that. I mean, they were so worried because they were so worried about trading either of these guys, because if they retired prematurely, that they would have retroactive cap recapture, because even if you trade him, you can't get out of it. You know, we saw in the case of Zach Parise, he has retired early. We saw in the case of Ryan Suter, he's now on his second team since Minnesota, all in the span of the 4 years that they bought out. So in a lot of ways, Bill Guerin made the prudent move where he just put cost certainty in the system. But what he did is he kind of bought himself 4 years, because nobody can operate, even though the Wild had a couple 100-point seasons, nobody could spend 12.7 or 14.7 like they've had the last 3 years, less than everybody else, and expect to actually have a winning team. It's just, you know, we saw it. I mean, in the Dallas series 2 years ago, you know, Joe Pavelski gets hurt in game 1. And what do? They put Tyler Seguin, a $9 million player, on the first line and first power play unit, and he lit the Wild up. The Wild lost Joel Eriksson-Ek and Sam Steele at $900 grand as their number one center. So, I mean, that, you know, it's exactly. You just can't operate like that. So, yes, to your point, Colby, Bill Guerin and Craig Leopold are in lockstep. They talk all the time. This is basically Craig Leopold's full-time job. He spends 4 to 5 days a week in Minnesota, even though he lives in Wisconsin. And you know, they believe in the plan that they have set forth, where they extended guys here, and that they feel like in the next 3 years that they're going to actually get to serious contender standpoint, that they are going to be able to go on some long runs. So we'll see.
All right. And my last, I have a roster question for you now, and it's about Marco Rossi. Okay. Because I was in Chicago when he was first coming in. And when I was in Chicago, I'm seeing the Central all the time. You know, we did the rookie tournament against the Minnesota Wild. Like, there's a lot of crossover when I was in Chicago. And since I've left, you know, I'm not there anymore, I don't see the Wild as much. There hasn't been a reason to look at the Wild as much, if I'm being honest or fair about it. But I'm just curious, is Marco Rossi ready to, you know, take that next step, or is he a guy that, you know, because I could see it, he could buy into John Hines and he could become a really, really valuable guy who can do a little bit of everything, or he's a guy that's going to get weeded out by the John Hines demands and styles of, you know, you watch John Hines' teams, they block a lot of shots. They're in your face. You don't get a lot. And this goes back to when he was coaching in Wilkes-Barre in the American League. I'm playing against him all the time in Wilkes-Barre. Like, his teams have an identity. You don't want to play defense against his teams because they're going to forecheck and finish every hit and block every shot. So is Rossi ready for that? Or where do you see his ceiling, you know, with this team and his future?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that question because maybe that's why because of what you just said is John Hines' MO. Maybe that's why right now he's on a checking line next to big trees and Yakov Trenin and Marcus Foligno. It doesn't almost seem to fit his skill set because he's such a skilled player. But what they love about him is that he's such a quality two-way guy and plays with incredible courage. He is not somebody that shies away from, most of his goals last year were within, feet of the net. Last night he scored a net front deflection on a Kirill Kaprizov shot. He goes to the corners. He's one of the most determined, undersized players that I've ever seen. If he gets weeded out here, Colby, I don't think it's going to be because of John Hines. It might just be because of the situation that they're in. They just signed Hartman to the extension. They have Joel Eriksson. They are bringing Danila Yurov over next year, and they really envision him to be a center and a top six center. So the question is, do you really want Marco Rossi, because Eriksson's definitely in the top six, and eventually Yurov will be. Do you really want Rossi to be your third line guy if you've got to also re-sign him even to a Cole Perfetti type contract at $3 million as a third line guy that's playing second power play, because he's really the way that the contracts line up here with Boldy on 7 years. And obviously Eriksson being the net front and Kaprizov here, that, he's really never going to get on that number one power play. And in Minnesota, their power play last year was 10th in the league, but their number one unit was top in possession in the offensive zone. They'd spend a minute 40, minute 50 on the ice. So the second unit barely gets on the ice at all here. So he barely got power play time last year. So I think the world of him. What he went through, missing a year because of myocarditis of his development, it's amazing that he got to the point. 2 years ago, he looked like he was not going to ever be able to function in the NHL. So he goes to Iowa. He works his butt off. He has an incredible summer, decides to, instead of go back to Austria, pretty much spend the entire summer in Minnesota. And what does he do? He rewards them with a 21-goal rookie season. So I think that he's going to continue to ascend. My question is, next summer when he's an RFA, because there was a lot of rumblings this summer that they were already looking to trade him. Is he part of the future? Or is that somebody that Bill Guerin will try to package for something else?
Yeah, it seems like everyone's very high on Rossi going into this season. And it seems like it's felt like that way last year too, going into his rookie year. Bruce, I don't have any more questions for you. I just do want to tell one story. Yeah, do you have something, Colby?
Well, I think everybody in our chat, I've seen this like 4 or 5 people are asking about the goaltending situation. I've seen a couple of our loyal listeners, watchers, however they take in the show, are asking for the goaltending plans this year and beyond.
Yeah. Well, this year, and beyond, as Johnny, I think, mentioned at the start, this is Fleury's, this is his farewell tour. He has said that this is going to be it. So he is going to go. And then they tried to trade Philip Gustafsson this summer. It came to no fruition. They had a deal done for Patrick Laine where I believe Gustafsson was going to Columbus.
Wow.
But then Laine wouldn't waive his no trade clause to come here. So at some point they might look to move him. I think that if Gus has a really quality year here, it makes the most sense to come back with Gus and Wallstedt next year. But Wallstedt is going to get a lot of time here in Minnesota. He's basically, the way it's going to work is they are going to keep 3 goalies. They think it's imperative to get him more NHL action this year. But there's going to be a lot of times where he shuttles back and forth based on whether it's workload. Like a good example is Gus is probably starting opening night. Fleury's probably starting the second game. And then they go on the road for 7. They're so tight against the cap. It kind of makes no sense to just, have Gus here or Wallstedt here for the first 2 games. You might as well start him in Iowa, then call him up for the road trip. So they might do stuff like that. But I think he's going to be based here, live here. And then when he goes down to Iowa, stay in a hotel, play some games, come back up. But he's going to be with this team a lot. He's definitely going to get NHL action. But if Gus becomes the Gus of 2 years ago, winning is going to be the priority this year.
Oh, yeah.
And if Gus is unbelievable again, and it's going to change the plan. And maybe you got to have Wallstedt get a lot more action down there, because that's the only thing I'm worried about is you have this 21, 22-year-old goalie. He needs reps. And you can only get so much with 3 goalies in practice. And so, yeah, you're facing NHL shooters. Yeah, you're having him being mentored by Marc-Andre Fleury. But I think the most important thing is to get him game action. So I think he's going to need to get a really quality frequent flyer account this year and make sure that he's got some winter tires on his car because he's going to spend a lot of time going back and forth between Minnesota and Des Moines.
That's the That's the USHL shuttle right there. Yeah. Your junior hockey stuff there and out in the Midwest of the U.S.
Jason Zucker, when he was here, I mean, I'm telling you, Zucker probably went up and down I-35 like 9 different times before his waivers kicked in. You know, that's the other thing, as you know, Colby. I mean, waivers mean everything in the NHL, and so you know, he has no waiver eligibility, so that means he's going to be a shuttle for them whenever they need to afford somebody to bring up.
The last thing I wanted to bring up, because Colby loves when people make fun of me. The first time I met Russo, Colby, it was actually in the airport flying to Florida. He was with Arthur Stapler, and Arthur also loves to give me shit. I was wearing shorts on the plane, and Russo just pulled up a scene out of Curb Your Enthusiasm to make fun of me. So I know you already love him, Colby, but I feel like you'd love him more after hearing that.
I think you've told me this story before.
Probably.
But like, who wears shorts on a plane? Like, honestly, like
Florida, I always do.
It's one of the greatest scenes.
Socks on a plane. Like, what are you thinking?
Yeah. I'd be somebody that would say every scene in Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm is like the greatest scene ever. But that scene when
because pulled it up right away.
Because I've always thought it too. Like, those seats are disgusting. Why would you want why would you want any part of your body touching anything? But that scene in First Class where Larry just says to the guy next to him, you know, that is not a good look. You know, he had the really short, like beige, you know, shorts and all that stuff. So yeah,
within 2 minutes of meeting him, he had that.
Russ, I'll tell you this, and I'll tell you the full story maybe next Frozen 4, next time we're in each other's company. But my dad actually did work with Larry back in the day. He built something for Larry at Larry's house out in California. And I mean, we're going back like 25, 30 years. My dad's an architect, and he specialized for a while, he was doing private small golf jobs for people at their homes. Like, he would build you a home, but then he could put in like a little chip and putt and stuff like this. But he did work at Larry's house, and the episode where he's arguing with the architect at the golf range over the swing. My dad tells the story, and we believe him because we do know that he did the job, because he was going back and forth from Philly to California all the time because Larry was very high maintenance. The arguments that they had, some of those made it onto the show. So I'll give you the full story at some point. But yeah, my dad back in the day, he did work at Larry's house, and we get such a kick out of laughing about those stories.
Yeah, I don't get starstruck by many people, but if I ever met Larry David, I'd just be absolutely like, you know, and I'd be so nervous because I know, you know, like what you see is what you get.
He'll go after you.
He'd be so unimpressed with me and everything.
He'll go after you.
Yeah. And I would be like Chris Farley on that SNL skit. I would be like, you remember that scene when you that was awesome. That was cool. I mean, that's the Seinfeld reunion season of Curb Your Enthusiasm is the best season I think ever. It's just unbelievable. Are you going to be in Philly when the Wild are there this month? Because
let's get together.
I know Kurz made dinner reservations because we're there on the first off night, I think. So
do you know when that is?
It's like October 22nd or 3rd.
Yeah. The only thing I have is I'll be out in Tampa for a couple days for the Warrior Classic. I work with the Flyers Warriors here.
Nice.
So I'll be out in Tampa for a couple of days for that, but that's mid-month. So I went to school. Well, I went to school with his brother, his younger brother. We're from the same hometown, Kurz and I. Like, he grew up literally 5 minutes from me in Radnor. So it's good to have him back. I like his work. And we had people in the chat here. I think it was Jeremiah who said he subscribes to The Athletic for your writing. I think you set the standard at The Athletic. I say this on our show all the time. I have a lot of beef with a lot of writers, and a lot of them work at the company that you work at. And I gotta say, like, you set the standard for professionalism, and your writing is it's great. I mean, it's just because you're one of the guys who studies the game and watches the game and isn't in the laptop the whole game, and it comes through with your work. So when Johnny texted me and said, "Hey, should we have Russo on?" I was like, "Get him on, absolutely." So,
well, I appreciate it. It means a lot, Colby. And funny enough, I fly to Philly from Tampa, so I actually might be in Tampa when you're there too.
Okay, perfect. So we'll link up for sure. Johnny, was there one other story or something?
No, I was just gonna say you don't want to hang out in New York when you're here. That's just a Colby thing.
That isn't not until April.
Okay.
So, but if I'm on that trip, a lot might depend on where the Wild go. Like if the trip means nothing, the Athletic might be like, might want to stay home. So.
All right, fair enough. But we appreciate your time this morning, Roos. Thank you so much. And we'll definitely need your insight as the season goes on for this division, because it's going to be a weird one, I feel like.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with you. See you, lads. See you, Colby.
See ya.
Thank you. All right, Colby, we got one more team to get to, and I know we're going a little bit long today, so we don't have to make it too long, but this team has a special place in my heart right now, and that is the Utah Hockey Club, and that is because I accidentally put $1,000 on them to make the playoffs. I meant to put $100 on it, so now I'm locked in, and I can't get out of the bet. I can't cash it out, so I have to now ride with the Utah Hockey Club the entire year. They're my official third favorite team, because the Blackhawks are now my second favorite team, with Pat Maroon being on our show every week. So I'm rooting for Chicago and then Utah. But this is a hot take, because, I feel like people are now like drinking that Kool-Aid of the new hot team, good vibes in a new city, interesting hockey market. The Delta Center looks like it has a good buzz to it, although it's not really built for the NHL. It's more of a basketball arena. The roster is basically the same as last year.
I disagree with that.
They add Marino and Sergachev
and Ian Cole. I mean, three of your six defensemen, you just brought in 3 players. I mean, so
nothing different to the forward group, though, really.
Look, as much as you've got another year with Sean Dursey. Valimaki's been okay. I mean, look, we just mentioned Marino. Marino's, I think he got a little banged up, but he's supposed to be back shortly. I mean, look, I think when you add Dursey, you've got Valimaki. Like, I think their back end is a strength now.
It's solid.
But I think you made a good point, and I'll actually give you credit for it. Pre-show meeting, talking about the fact that up front, it's just too much soft skill. And I think questions that you have to ask is like, can Logan Cooley take the next step? Sure, I think he can. I think Logan Cooley takes the next step. Dylan Gunther he's played 78 total games in the National Hockey League, and he just got 8 times 7-1-4. I mean, you made that argument about Jeremy Swayman the other day. I'll tell you what, this is a guy who's barely played. He was in the minors to start the year last year. He wasn't even supposed to play in the NHL, and then he gets brought up, and I think he had 35 points in the last 45 games, but he was supposed to be in the American League.
It was Vic who said the soft skill, not me.
Okay, so good job, Vic. But is Barrett Hayton going to stay healthy? Does Josh Doan? I mean, Josh Doan comes into the league last year and gets like 10 points in 11 games, right? Is he a full-time NHL player that can contribute? Right now, they have him on that fourth line. Look, I think Clayton Keller's a superstar nobody talks about because he's been in Arizona, but I don't know. I just don't see enough out of that forward group that makes me think anything other than 7th or 8th place in the division, in the division. And then the goaltending. Yeah, Ingram showed some flashes. Vemelka showed flashes, but again, not guys that give me the warm and fuzzy. Yeah. Oh my God. What? I'm laughing at New York Marines comment. Yeah. I don't honestly, New York Marine, I cannot take your bait and start getting into politics.
We don't do politics.
You are baiting me with some of your comments. I saw your earlier comment as well, which I do completely agree with you. You are talking to 2 people that are enemies of the place you are referencing. But look, I mean, now I'm a little thrown off track here. I just don't think Utah is a team that is a dangerous hockey team this year. I think that, they're building, but I'm not on the vibes train with Johnny.
Well, yeah, I made it clear this is simply based off vibes. I don't look at their roster and think, oh my God, this is a playoff team. But I just have that feeling, and I think sometimes that happens. I'm not saying they're like a Vegas or whatever, right? But listen, like you said, Keller is a star. I think Matias Maccelli is one of the most underrated players in the NHL. 57 points last year. He's a stud. He's a good third liner. But like Vic said, soft skill. Liam O'Brien, a big body, big personality, can help boost, that team's just overall confidence, maybe would be the word. But I think Connor Ingram, like we kind of looked past it. Sneaky good season last year, a plus 8.3 goals saved above expected, a 907 save percentage, and a 2.91 goals against. I mean, 2.91 goals against isn't great, but the team that they had last year in Arizona with the circumstances, it's a pretty decent year for a goalie. And, you just talk about what you said with Stammer and being traded and whatnot, think about how excited these guys are to be in an NHL organization again. You know, they're going to feel like they're basically not on a college campus. It's going to be a whole different setting.
Richard, I was waiting for that comment. Oh God. I was waiting for these comments to start coming. I don't think you're going to understand Chef Richard's
politics stuff. Yeah, it goes above my head.
It's just people are making jokes right now, and they're funny. They are funny. I'm laughing, and I'm hearing all you. Johnny,
I don't pay attention to politics.
Johnny is betting on the Utah Hockey Club because of his Joy and Vibes campaign. That's what we're going with. That's what his $1,000 is going towards. All of this is going over his head, which is why we love him so much.
Yes.
The boyish innocence out of my guy, Jonny Laz. But I'm glad to see some of our listeners jumping in here and taking shots because it is. I don't get any of it. It is funny. So look, you think Utah finishes where?
4.
4.
Wild card spot. 4.
Okay.
Do you want to go through our 8?
I think we have. I think we should get to our bet.
Well, I don't think we gave like the 1 through 8. Like,
well, I think what we should do, honestly, is I think on our last day of previews, or I think on our first show on opening night, which is not a preview, I believe. Are we doing the last preview on opening night?
Well, I mean, the league basically starts Friday with the Devils and Sabres.
Yeah, but I mean like opening night here.
Wait, what do you mean? Are we doing a show on opening night? Yeah, of course we are.
I'm saying, are we doing another preview? Like how many
we got another preview tomorrow, the Pacific tomorrow, and then Monday, Tuesday are previews as well.
And what day is Tuesday? Is that October what?
The 8th is when it starts.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think at the end of all this, we can put together 2 graphics and we can show where we think everybody's going to sit, because we don't have a graphic prepared. If you want to run through where you think everyone's going to sit, go ahead. But it's not like we have a graphic that we can refer back to.
Yeah, that's fine.
So I think we should get to our bet and talk about our partners at Bet365. And then I think we should end the show because we're about an hour and 40 minutes in. And unlike you, I have a life to get to.
Yeah, I have to actually get home for the Jewish holidays. So I got to beat the traffic out of New York City today. But let's get into our bet of the day presented by Bet365. And it is who will win the Central Division. If we can get that graphic up, Vic. So I think we both kind of agree on it. The Dallas Stars, to me, are the team that wins the division. But I would say the best value here, if you're looking for value, is taking the Nashville Predators at plus 333.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that is 100% the best value. I think people in our chat made some good points about Dallas, maybe their regression on their back end. We'll see if that remains to be true. I still think the Ottinger contract season is going to make him step into, playing even better. So I like the value of Nashville, though. I think they really could be that team this year to make the biggest jump.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. So we're taking the Dallas Stars to win the Central, although we both like the value on Nashville. That's really all we're going to, end on today for today's episode. A great preview of the Central Division. Big thanks to Barstool Chief and Michael Russo for coming on. Great to have some guests on. We'll have more guests on tomorrow for the Pacific preview.
Look for that article that's coming out from Michael Russo with the owner. You don't see sit downs with ownership enough, to be honest, in hockey. So I always appreciate those and like those. And a guy like Michael Russo, who's so well respected, is going to get the best out of a guy like that. So make sure if you have a subscription, look for that article by Russo.
Why am I getting roasted in the chat?
I know, it's really awesome.
Yeah. All right. It is what it is. We'll end the show for today. We look forward
thank you to everybody who wished Johnny and I a happy new year. Back at you. Obviously, this is a big holiday for us, and we do appreciate your guys' support. And Johnny, last word, final word.
Shana Tova.
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Saravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe.